start this. Um, excuse me. We're going to take a look at the city as an object, which might mean simply an object from the air, from a model, from an architect's plan, from a map. Look at it as a total object, not just the particulars, which it is, like ant heap or something complex, but look at it as an object. What we see here is the Noli map of Rome. And we can see a couple of patterns in the piazzas, the pervasiveness of piazzas, pervasiveness of the courtyards of the medieval town. This is in the 18th century, I believe. So the Roman patterns happened over the top of it. There's no, structuring, grid structure, as there's a very diffuse one, as there is in the Roman military towns. It is an organic town as an object. As you can see, the Piazza Navona was an old horse racing track. A couple other items within that. The churches form interior and exterior forms. You can see the little circle there. That's the beautiful, wonderful, enduring volume of the Pantheon, probably my favorite building in the world. Describes an interior space perfectly. Off of that, we see St. Ivo. We see a number of things. We see the river and the Isole Tiburtina, the island. This is an object. It's a snapshot. Initially, emotionally, you might say, oh, a lot of streets, a lot of confusion, but a lot of nooks, a lot of places for citizens to live and dwell, and it's enclosed, and maybe it renders a feeling of warmth. I've had various friends live in these piazzas. Where's Piazza Santa Maria in Trastevere? No, that's over the other side, but the Campo di Fiori, trying to find that. It's there. A few friends lived on the outside of that. Very small medieval apartments. It was compartmentalized, often adjoining a larger church area. It was wonderful. Trying to find that and can't see. It's down in the lower right there. The Campo di Fiori. There it is, off on the left there. Further, architectural design studio, culture forces, Piazza del Popolo, Bernini, Piazza del Popolo, Rome, Industrial Revolution, Hall of Machines, 1880 through 89. How are we visually connected in a city? Looking above as an object, looking down within. What is urban analysis? How can we see it now as an object, as a totality? Tokyo is still the largest city in the world. New Delhi now, I think, is the second. And New York comes in almost not within the top 10 largest cities in the world. But how do we perceive these places in terms of an analysis, and then perceiving the culture as if the urban map, the urban model, the bird's eye view is kind of an art object in itself? Formal ordering principles, we'll understand those. The use of precedents, how are cities layered on top of other cities? Site conditions, is it a grid like New York City? Is it a sprawling map as in medieval Rome? We see aesthetic as like an art object, aesthetic sort of tendencies such as Palazzo Caprini, Bramante, and ordering within the golden section of the window placements and the volume. But then we see by Le Corbusier a reduction of this into steel supports on the inside, maybe a support on the exterior. 1914, we see Leverhouse as kind of a response to the modernity of the Bauhaus, just square buildings. Is it boring or is it true? Is it beautiful in its truth as an ordering of space? These follow. This is Paris. Different aspects. We have a festival down one of, or a parade down one of the Paris boulevards, the Arc de Triomphe. Arc de Triomphe, an object that the Eiffel Tower that became iconographic, but sort of resembled, presented, according to, I think it was Baudelaire, and a couple romantic modernists of the 19th century, kind of an abomination. A steel structure didn't represented kind of the technology of the 19th century and not something beautiful. To us, it's become something iconographic and beautiful. This is the Louvre, the Tuileries up there, this garden alongside the Seine, very beautiful to experience on a weekend. Becomes museums and artifacts become part of the work of art in that age too. The Louvre, Tuileries, so forth. So we can see kind of this belt of early cities happen, cities as objects, cities conducive. Let's just somewhat consider that cities are these. Sorry, I forgot to float this view. Float on top. There we go. Back. Cities became these collective works of objects in Mesoamerica, Peru, the Nile with the Egyptians, the Mesopotamia, the Indus, and around the Chinese lowlands there. Yellow River in China, valleys of Mexico, cultivation of cereals such as wheat, domestic. So if we posit this idea that city building is a product of agency, the product of agency, the product of collective agency, a group art project, as it were, what are the, beyond the livable, usable tendencies, what are the artistic, aesthetic, exchange value sort of responses to the creation of city as an object? We have the oasis theory, a city within a desert, a tough environment. Hilly flanks theory that happens in valleys and so forth. Feasting theory, perhaps conjoined with the alluvial plains, flooding of the biannual flooding of rivers. Demographic theories, its long trade lines and so forth, evolutionary intentionality theories behind city and development as, in this lecture, as an art object, sort of. There's the glacial sheets, came down to this level. The Fertile Crescent, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Kuwait, Jordan. It was recently called in this book, Cities, the First 6,000 Years. The Fragile Crescent is not exactly fertile, but the tendency for the cities to beg sort of upkeep in a more or less dry region became cradles of our first cities. City as object, Catalhoyuk, southern Italy, you could see develop aesthetically as an object of non-right angle rectangles, but the confluence, sort of massing exercises of these things became organic as They had shared walls, and one could say here we see the so-called insect-like tendency of making efficient use of these walls, as we can see all over Turkey, the upper part of the Fertile Crescent. We see the position of Çatalhöyük in the Anatolian Peninsula, but we see that these things respond to a collective endeavor out of this response to collectivize. Again, we're looking at this as works of art and objects flying over, looking down. Oh, I recognize Paris. Oh, I recognize Rome. Oh, I recognize New York City. I recognize Shanghai. For all of these aesthetic dynamics, as we want to diminish the importance of aesthetics in the city, particularly recently, and when one wants to impact or sort of enhance the aesthetic dimension, as in Haussmann, what other sorts of damages do they create in taste? Haussmann plowed up many medieval streets to create the order. Le Corbusier wanted to impose grids and slabs upon Paris. Certainly there is an aesthetic behind that, and certainly after I attended the Le Corbusier show at MoMA, it did point out how the city is a sculpture, a minimalist sculpture, but therein is the aesthetic, a very particular aesthetic to a particular man. How does that differ from the aesthetics of form, just city as a sculptural form created in a collective endeavor like Çatalhöyük, the ancient city, one of the first cities? Bronze Age was the technology, Babylon, Mesopotamia, Troy, Turkey, Knossos. A lot of the Greek drama, a lot of the Homeric drama is about the aesthetic and metaphysical messages of the transition, the troubles created in the Bronze Age collapse, the troubles created with the sea peoples dealing with influences into the city. Once you create this beautiful work of art, people want to see it, be around it, enter into it, and maybe destroy it out of this idea of robbing this stationary object. A civilization with urban areas, you have to have, these are the algorithms, and we're considering it as a work of art. A written language, an extensive agricultural base outside the city to feed it. We still do, as we pointed out, dependent upon our petroleum, post-peak oil. So it's extensive, but it is also extremely fragile. The supply lines of agriculture in the city extremely fragile. I pointed out again in many of these lectures that part of our fragility under COVID-19 was the fact that we have 3 days of food. I personally, in Brooklyn, stocked up on pasta. Didn't use all of it, but I was prepared for the worst in a breakdown of supply lines. An interrelated set of social institutions, including class stratification, rich areas, poor areas. Sure, even in Çatalhöyük, there were richer families, perhaps sharing walls with poorer families. They walked on top of these structures. Political and religious hierarchies, like insects with hierarchies. The ape and the ant-heap seemed, because of communication, because of hierarchical structures, as we note, under the sibling development of the internet, these tended to collapse. But as they collapse, we have a greater threat on job markets and so forth. It's needed for communication, for territorial states, administration, defense, public work programs, feeding and keeping fallow labor parties employed during non-agricultural times there were cases where temple and pyramid building by farmers sort of in the down season was part of maintaining everyone's busyness in the city. And there's a complex division of labor of full-time craftspeople, servants, soldiers, officers, alongside the great mass of primary workers. I am by profession a professor. This whole discipline I hold as kind of a knowledge worker, or maybe old priestly caste, is, again, when the breakdowns of hierarchies with the creation of the internet is in danger as an entity, as a certain fragmented knowledge is found, skills, so forth, online. The belief systems, religion, philosophy, let's just call them systems of shooting from the hip about where, what, why, when, how am I in a society in a lifetime, is secularized to a great degree by the internet now. Diversity of forms. Modernity is, in a sense, a secular religion promulgated by academia. All the architects went to the universities and into the corporate spaces. And these hierarchical forms are threatened, but so is the rest of employment as hierarchies. So we see the rise of the gig economy, the influence of vacuous, empty influencers on social media as an alternative system, but we do look to these hierarchies as an aspirational structure. They are largely unfair and unwieldy, but they were parts of our systems for 5,000 years since the invention of the city. Perhaps, lightly in the hunting-gathering society, but certainly got to ramp up in cities. Now, if we do compare through this, cities and the internet as sort of twins, or not twins, but siblings, the internet has changed all of that. And certainly COVID has shown to what extent the internet, telephony, telemedicine, teleeducation can not just improve, maybe it's not an improvement, but expand upon that idea. There's tools and ads, utilitarian items, a plate, and weapons, a dagger, all within the Bronze Age. Knossos was one of the extensive cities in the Bronze Age. In the Levant, the eastern part of the Mediterranean, with the Egyptians, the Syrians, Hittites, and Egyptians had kind of a power struggle, had their own forms of arms race with the war chariot, used bronze for weaponry, devised standing armies, had similarities. Knossos on Crete was a very particular sort of kingdom, isolated somewhat, but did trade by sea with these other two camps. Greece was nascent and just developing back then, so we still aren't quite at 1700 to I think it's 1200 BC that there was a total collapse of this Bronze Age Levant Eastern European trading, thriving culture of balances. Many blame the volcano explosion on Santorini, or many accounts have the invasion of the Sea Peoples. Who were these peoples? In terms of standing armies, these three kingdoms reigned supreme in the area and formed a kind of triumvirate and power sharing. Here's Knossos, here is in Iraq. We used the I think I've broken down in Iraq as an expansion of and to that idea. And we will continue in the next film.